Ian, why don't you take a moment or two and introduce yourself, who you are and what you do, and then I want to talk a little bit about this kitty condo financing that we chatted about the other week.
Okay, certainly. So my name's Ian Bennett. I'm with Premier Mortgage Group here in Boulder, Colorado. I've been with Premier Mortgage Group for the last 4 years and in the mortgage industry since 2006. I work a lot with both first-time and investment folks in terms of purchases, do refinances and the like. Being in Boulder, we do have a lot of condominiums, so I tend to do a lot of work with condominiums and have learned the hard way of how to get them done and what sort of options are there out there.
Great. We chatted the other day about how condominiums could be purchased both for as a student investment deal where a person buys a condo and their child lives in it when they're in college, number one.
Sure, like kitty condo, if you will.
And the other is we talked about how it is that I could buy a condo for my grandkids, as an example, and then when the grandkid needs college money, they'll have that money available. So could you describe those financing options, please?
Yeah, so the first option is what we typically refer to as a kitty condo. And, both of them are very similar. But we'll start with the first. Essentially, if you have a student that's going to school, let's use CU as an example, as that's pertinent to our current area, mom and dad would help co-sign a mortgage for the student, typically on condominiums because that's kind of the purchase price and what most people feel comfortable with buying the first home. And typically what we do, we have different options. We have both an FHA option, which is a government entity insured by the federal government. And essentially it allows for a low down payment. The student, in this case, would live in the property as their primary residence, and then parents would be a non-occupying co-borrower. And what that allows for is a low down payment. And typically, the student actually doesn't have to have any income. The student does need to have a credit score of some sort. And the parents basically their financials will back the repayment and the credit qualifying. Other options are non-FHA. Freddie Mac, which is, I jokingly I say is a government entity with all bailouts and so on, is another option. Where it's a similar situation where the student has to have a credit score. However, the student does have to have some sort of income, at least $1 per month, as odd as that sounds. Okay. And the qualifying ratios, or the debt-to-income ratios, are blended, very similar to the example one, with the parents being a cosigner. And those are the two options that we typically use. And then your other question, if you could repeat that, Reg?
Yeah, let's say that I had a grandkid, or actually, in your case, you just had a child.
I sure did. Yeah.
And you could say, I want to buy a condominium for my child today.
Right.
So that when my child gets to be 18, I've accumulated enough asset with the purchase of that property for my child to have them have us have the income to pay for college.
Yeah, and that's not as complex as it is a little bit more money intensive. And what we'd look to do is buy the property as an investment property. And typically what we do is with a 25% down payment, we're going to have, which is a much larger down payment than an FHA situation. But in this case, it's going to be a non-owner occupied condominium. And what I've seen and had clients do in the past is they'll purchase a home, a condominium, with these intentions and rent it in the short term, in hope that it might be a residence for their child when they go to college, if it's in a college area, or it's something that will eventually be paid off and or cash flow enough that they can use that money in return to pay tuition and or sell the property and use it for tuition.
Yeah, as I think I mentioned to you when we chatted last about this, one of my friends bought two condos when he had two children under the age of 5,
Hmm.
and sent them to both private schools in the Northeast with the accumulation of wealth that had happened over 18 years in this, it was happened to be in Boulder County in this market. And if you think about it, Ian, from a historical perspective, there is no period that I can think of over, let's say, 15 years when you haven't had ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs, and you end up with a significant wealth accumulation if the time frame's long enough.
Sure.
Now, in a week period or a year period or 2 year period, you could be in trouble. But over a 15-year period, not an issue.
You know, Reg, and I completely agree with you. And I mean, obviously, I'm in real estate as a business. I firmly believe in it. But quite frankly, for me to invest, let's use $100,000 as an example. If I'm going to invest $25,000 in a piece of property that I know that I can drive by and see that property at any point that I want to, in terms of putting that same amount of money in the market, quote unquote, I feel personally much more comfortable knowing that that interest in that the profit, if you will, or the gains on that money, a little bit more substantial.
Mm-hmm.
They're tangible. I mean, I can reach out and actually touch the building as opposed to, talking with a stockbroker. Additionally, I feel like the risk is somewhat calculated, and someone else is actually paying part of that risk as your renter. In this case, it's certainly something I prescribe to or subscribe to, and I certainly recommend it to clients as well. If you feel comfortable with real estate, there's a lot of folks that don't. However, you could probably ask a selection of a dozen or two people from the ages of 25 to 65 and ask them how their 401k has done in the last 5 to 8 years, and I can promise you they're not going to have as much positive feedback as they would prior. So,
well, it's interesting because in the early 80s, 3 or 4 years after I got my real estate license, so a fair number of years ago,
mm-hmm.
some partners and I bought some single-family houses here in town, and our investment was, the purchase price was in the low $70,000 range.
Okay.
And we put some money down, and then the market crashed big time, and we decided that the partnership decided we didn't want to hold on to them, which was, at that point, it sounded like a good idea, and upon reflection was really stupid.
Sure.
Because the properties that we bought for in the mid-70s, $71,000, $72,000, $75,000, one of my friends just maybe 7 years ago bought a piece of property here in town in the same neighborhood for his child to attend college here in town, and paid over $300,000 for it. So
yeah.
From 70 to 300 grand. Granted, it was 25 years,
mm-hmm.
but still, the market went up, it went down, went up, went down, and paid over $300,000 for it. So pretty
Certainly.
cool.
Yeah, and I'm of the thought is we're always going to have folks that need to live somewhere, whether it's a rental or a home they're buying. And, in certain areas, Boulder County obviously is very unique, and Boulder City is, we're surrounded by a green belt and open space. We're almost like Tokyo in that way, where there's only so much land. And the supply and demand over time, and I believe, is in the favor of the person owning the real estate.
Right. Okay. So what else about kitty condos in that area that we need to talk about?
Well, it can be a more in-depth subject in terms of the ins and outs of condominium financing in general.
Okay.
But I think the basic premise of our conversation, and for those folks that end up tuning in and getting to see this chat of ours, is that there is an opportunity. There are challenges, but when you work with experts in your field, the outcome can be pretty positive. I think that kind of sums it up.
Okay. If somebody wanted to contact you and chat about mortgages, particularly in the Colorado market for sure, how would they go about doing that?
Well, the easiest way to get in touch with me is either email or phone. My phone number is 303-443-2050, and my email address is my first initial I, with my last name, Bennett, Bennett, at pmglending.com. That's Paul Mary George Lending.com.
Okay. And folks, if you're watching this, below this video, there'll be some links to contact me and some other things. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. And Ian, thank you very much for your help this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you, Reg. Have a great day.
All right, you also.
Thanks.